I'm Rhonda Buss, and today we're putting together the Robson coat by Sewaholic Patterns. You'll notice on the pattern that the seams it has princess line seams. These are very important seams because they are what give the coat its shape, and they give it a very feminine shape. You can see here, this is the front princess line seam, and you can see how it has just this lovely curve to it. What happens with princess line seams is rather than typically we have a dart on the side, everything gets rotated into this princess line seam, so that's what helps to give us this beautiful shaping over our bust line. And there's usually another dart down along the waist, which is also incorporated into that princess line seam. The nice thing about princess line seams is that they're relatively easy to sew. They don't take the time that darts take, and you get maximum impact for very little effort. The one thing that you need to always make sure of when you're sewing a princess line seam is the notches. Because of this fullness that goes over the bust, you need to make sure that it's kept in that area, that somehow you don't push the fullness down to another area on that seam. You can see here on the back of this seam how it was clipped. So this seam needed a little bit more to be opened up a little bit more to give it that nice curve, and this one had a little bit more fullness in it that was eased into that seam. But it's really not that big of a deal to sew it. Just match your notches and you should never have a problem. Now the other aspect about this coat that makes it really just lovely is the seam binding that finishes off all of the seams. If you've never sewn seam binding, don't be intimidated by it. It's really quite easy to work with. And one thing that you can do is you could make your own seam binding if you like and have something contrasting on the inside so that when you open your coat it's quite dramatic. Or you can do like I did and just buy a seam binding that will match the interior of the coat. So what you will need to do is take your seam binding and press one side open. You can do this after you sew, but it doesn't matter if you do it before or ahead of time. It might be just a little bit easier if you do it prior to sewing it. But only press one side open. Then, once you've sewn your seam, the next step is to take your seam binding and the folded edge, match that to the edge of the seam allowance that has already been sewn. Take that to your machine. And you're going to sew right inside that fold or that little ditch. The little ditch makes for a very nice guideline. Now, of course, I would go all the way down and finish the entire seam. Now that I've sewn that on, what I want to do is press this forward over the stitching that I've done, and then fold this back. Now we've completely encased that raw edge. Then you're going to take this back to the machine, line your needle up right with that folded edge, and stitch right in that little ditch area. So you can see now that the seam is completely encased. We would then take it and press it to the side. And then the next step will be to do the top stitching. You can see the top stitching I've done on this seam from the back side, and here from the front side. It just gives a beautiful, beautiful finish to the seam. This top stitching is done with just regular thread. You can actually buy top stitching thread if you'd like. It could be a contrast color. Sky's the limit. You can do just whatever you would like to do. My top stitching is about 1/4 of an inch away from the seam edge. Just an amount that I think looks especially attractive. Next, we'll be talking about the collar and the belt loops for this jacket.